How goes it?
How goes it? Well, it's been an interesting day. Well, I said, I think it was the last session we had, session or session before, that I felt like the best way to treat these sessions, these dialogues, was to let them take their own course.
Yeah.
For about a week now, some things have been brewing, and the the sort of intuitive feeling about it that kept coming up was this is one of those times, however often they might happen, that there actually needs to be an intention to bring some things up and see where they lead.
Hmm.
So
Let's do it.
yeah. Now I'm going to kind of take them in order of what seems like priority,
Okay.
I guess, in terms of which one has the most energy. Leaving there's some questions about inquiry that we need to get to, but that one kind of needs to be last.
Okay.
So I hope we have time to get to it because some peculiar things have started showing up with regards to inquiry.
Interesting.
And I'll just to touch on it briefly, you look for the agent, the doer, the one who's making decisions. And when I first started doing that, when you first suggested that practice, it was pretty clear to see that there wasn't anyone making decisions.
Hmm.
That there wasn't something happening or someone doing something that looked like, okay, well, I need to do this now. Instead, all that could ever be seen was maybe a thought about, oh, it's time to make dinner. And then maybe an intention shows up, maybe it doesn't, but somehow something happens and the body gets up and it goes and it moves. And what's even more interesting is the fact that once it gets going, if there was anything that could be construed as an intention at the front of it, once you get going on something, it's just a chain of causality. And there is no way to construe, no matter how hard you look, or to find or to ascribe to these things, someone doing something. It just starts going. And this long chain of things will go, oh, time to start dinner. Next thing you know, it's 2 hours later and you're cleaning up. And the only place where you could say a decision might have been made, which really is not the case, was right at the very front,
Yeah.
right at the very front, which
Yep.
is not the case there either. But if you're going to say there was some place where it did happen, that would be the place. Everything else it's like dominoes. Off they go.
Absolutely.
But what's gotten weird is it's getting harder to see.
Like wrecking, like it just feels again like you're making choices. Like,
No, no, quite the opposite. It's
oh, good.
not only is there not someone there making choices, but it's okay. There might have been there were times where a thought comes up or something comes up that, and it is somehow the initiating moment for going to do something, and there might be a little bit of tension in the chest right before the body gets up to move and go do it. There might be little telltale signs of something that seems like something that seems to kind of point to maybe somewhere deep below the threshold of awareness, some kind of initiating principle. But now it's getting to the point where it doesn't look like anything's happening. It's just all of a sudden something happens.
Amazing.
All of a sudden you're getting in the shower. It's like, where the hell did that come from? I was looking, I was paying attention, but I didn't see anything happen. All I know is suddenly I'm up and I'm heading into the shower. So
Wow.
it seems like I knew it was going to be hard to talk about. I knew this because I thought about it, how would you describe this to somebody? And I don't know how to. The best thing I can say is it just seems like it's harder to see these things starting. I mean, you can see all the actions, but trying to see something that looks like the beginnings of a chain of actions It seems like it's harder to see.
Yeah, well, it sounds like what you're experiencing, which is amazing, is that there's less of uh the warning thoughts, like those preconceptions about what's going to happen next, which is then followed by action. The only thing that makes it seem like you are okay, I think I should get up and take a shower now, is this thought in your mind that might show you standing up and going to the shower, or the
Mm,
realization of like, yeah, I guess I should go take a shower, all of which is totally superfluous. It's not like those thoughts necessarily do anything.
right?
But so now when you don't have that, there's the kind of silence of just standing up and moving to the shower without having to
Yeah,
preface that with some internal justification of why you have to now move and do the thing.
yeah. And it's weird because as much as I've been doing this, which for a while I was doing it more, the last few days, last week, it seems like there's been more forgetting to do it than there had been for a while. So that means what often happens is it's caught a split second later, like get up to go do something, and then as soon as that happens, it triggers the memory of, oh, look at that. That's from our conversation at one point in time. That's less than ideal. It's better to actually catch it while it's actually happening. But at least, even if it's less than ideal, at least it's only just milliseconds later, so it's still real clear. You can see with a reasonable degree of clarity what was or was not happening, and that's more often than not the case. It's there wasn't a thought, there wasn't anything. It was just, where did that come from?
That's that sort of subconscious thing that we just don't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that recognition that, oh, there's some sort of warning that the action is going to take place. It often comes about in a way that makes it feel like I have to make the decision to instigate the action or not.
Right.
Now we're just recognizing, oh, like things are just happening without there being that warning beforehand. Actions still are just as effectively behaved, right? Like
Right.
like you're in any way less effective with what you're doing. It's just not a pre-thought about it.
And the weird thing is, and I think maybe this is partly tied to some sort of, I don't know if I quite call it an expectation, because the expectation seems to imply hoping for a certain something. But there was this idea that showed up when this was first suggested a while back about doing enough of this sort of inquiry would eventually lead to some sort of insight, some sort of real, very strong, deeply felt insight of there not being anyone here. And at least so far, who knows, that might be right. That could change in the future. I don't know. But as of right now, even though it's really obvious that no one's doing anything, there's still this sense of, yeah, but I don't feel like I see the impersonal nature of that, the fact that there's not anyone doing these things as clearly or deeply as it seems like, I don't know, I'm not even sure how to finish the thought, that it ought to be or needs to be, or that there was a hope for. I'm not sure what it is, because I haven't been clinging to it. It hasn't been a case of, gosh, I hope that happens. It's
Yeah.
just this idea about it,
Yeah.
without any real deep sense of it's got to be like that.
Yeah. 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 So not it's like we have a variety of practices that we kind of prescribe, which all for some people might be the thing that really just blows everything open. But we never know which thing is going to work for which person or in which way, because everybody is different like that. So it's something where clearly you've derived or you've gotten a lot out of it. There's been a lot of benefit to it for reinforcing the fact that there's no choosing, um, there's no one there doing it on a certain level, and you are getting the sense that things are just happening without sort of a preconceived notion of it beforehand. So that is insight right there, right? That
Yeah.
maybe it's not, my body has dissolved and all of a sudden I'm a cloud of particles floating through the air, but that's not necessarily what we're going for either. So noticing what is happening and how that maybe differs from if you do have some sort of expectation that you haven't really verbalized.
You know, it hits me what is actually the kind of sticking point, if that's the right description. It's that in spite of the fact that it's really obvious that there's not someone deciding to do things and initiating action, there's still this sort of, and I guess it's probably habitual, this, it's been doing it for decades, this idea or belief that someone still wants to do a certain something or is looking for a result of an action or you know go and talk to this person about something or other because you're wanting to resolve an issue. Well, if I'm wanting to go and talk to someone to resolve an issue, even if I can see that no one's doing that, still the idea that there is an issue to resolve and there's a desire for it is a subtle sense of me.
Mm.
And that pops up all over the place.
And like you had said, actually, one question ago, you had mentioned that there's still like a sort of, I forget exactly, but you use the word personal in there. Like there's a personal layer to the even when you're not thinking about it ahead of time and you're just getting up to do the thing, there's still something like personal about the action.
Yes.
And I think that's what you were kind of getting at with this one, right?
Yeah.
So so many layers of things there. When you are okay, so take one of them. So say you have an issue with somebody and you feel like you need to go talk to them to resolve it. You can be aware of the discomfort that's going on in the body, which is leading to this need for resolution. So there's a sensation in your body that is uncomfortable when it feels like there is a thought about being non-resolved with some sort of an issue. That itself is not a personal thing. That's a representation in the body that's in itself really does nothing. In part of the kind of whole circuitry of the body mind complex, it plays a role, otherwise it wouldn't be there. But in itself, the sensations don't necessarily do anything, right? You've had an argument with your wife and you're in the other room and it's like, yeah, I feel like I need to go talk to her and resolve this. You're feeling sensations in the body that you're attributing this to the feeling of irresolution, that I need to go talk with her so that this sensation goes away. But the sensation itself doesn't have anything to do with that. It's really just sensation. Like I said, in the sort of entire workings of the circuitry on that level, yes, there is a push between that's there. It sparks some thoughts about doing something to resolve this, and it might step by step lead to the body getting up, moving into the other room, and apologizing and doing what needs to be done. But by itself, you could just sit there with just that sensation, and the sensation does absolutely nothing in its own, of its own accord. There's no volition inherent in the sensation appearing.
Right.
It's there, it goes. You have a thought, which probably a stream of thoughts about the situation, which make, if you have an argument and want to resolve it, there's a bunch of stuff about yourself, about the other person. It's necessarily a self-referential thing if you are having some sort of a disagreement or something that needs to be resolved. Because if you do, there is a belief in my story, my rightness, their wrongness, my wrongness and their rightness. one, whatever it is, there's still a belief that's inherent there, and it has to do with this belief in a me.
Right.
The need to resolve even that urge of even the thoughts of like, I don't like to go to bed angry. I don't like to have this feeling of tension between us. I wanted to address that. Even those thoughts are all based around this. I don't want to feel this sense of discomfort. I don't want to have thoughts about our a rift between us. I don't want her thinking a certain thing of me or seeing me a certain way. All of these things can be in there, which all have some sort of self-referential component to them. So if you if you were in a situation where there was just absolutely no identity, like absolutely nothing there of the sort, and then uh first of all, it would be very difficult to have an argument with somebody, like that kind of doesn't happen if there's really no position here that's being defended or anything like that.
Right.
Um, let's say for the sake of argument, still you said something you didn't mean, words came out, you didn't mean anything by it, but it was taken the wrong way or something. And so you still feel a sense of discomfort about somebody missing, having their feelings hurt and misinterpreting what you said, even though you didn't say anything of aggression. Um, Still sitting with that, it's possible to just sit with all of that, not necessarily do anything. If you really weren't attached to any sort of outcome, to anything having to be the way that it is or not, or have it be other than it is, what is wrong with the other person thinking you're a total schmuck because you said something and hurt their feelings? What is wrong with you just sitting there with a feeling of discomfort in the body? There's always something where we are pushing against, okay, I don't want the situation to be the way it currently is. I'm going to do something to resolve it. I don't want to feel thirsty right now, so I'm going to reach out and get a glass of water. It doesn't matter how minute it is. There is always something which is not quite satisfactory in this moment, and there is some sort of push to do something to change it. And the really big examples of that we work with fifth fetter stuff where we're working with aversion to the moment, but ultimately just even getting up to go for a shower has a certain motivation to it, even if you're not consciously thinking about I think I need a shower. There's something there in the moment with everything that we do that is driving a behavior. Otherwise, we could just sit for hours and hours and never move, just staring at a wall. And very few of us actually do that. Um, and I don't want to also paint a false picture where, I doubt that it's ever going to be where we're engaged in a world in a way where it feels impersonal to the level that we can imagine it being.
Hmm.
Like we can have an idea of somebody being so completely vacant that they're just absolutely, an absolute black hole walking through, like, in a way that you see people kind of with like blank affects and they just seem kind of zombie-like and detached. But that's not what we're talking about with this. So it's unlikely that you're going to have this, you might have experiences like that are like a temporary thing, but you're probably not going to have a lingering, lifelong experience where there is just you're it's normal to not it's normal to recognize that you are not doing anything. It's normal to recognize that actions are just happening. But if it feels like there's still something where you feel the need to apologize to somebody or um, you know, being hungry and getting up to get something to eat, it's still probably going to feel like there's something there that is. some personal-ish, self-referential-ish kind of thing for some of these basic needs, even though they're just happening. You're probably going to find that you are drawn to same foods that you've always been drawn to eating and not going for something completely random. You're not going to just go out and start chewing on your lawn, you know, greens are greens. So having a realistic expectation, I think is also super useful, but being open to the fact that we never know. And it is possible that some other experience of impersonality will deepen in some way. Or it just might not be exactly what you anticipate.
Okay.
Does that kind of address what you're
Yeah,
asking?
I mean, it does. It's interesting because that last bit was really talking more about what may or may not come further down the road. I mean, as of right now, there are times where the things that it seems like need to be sort of ferreted out. It seems like there are times where it gets right on the line, maybe other times where it actually crosses right over the line into more eighth fetter. There's this thought sometimes that, well, don't turn the first fetter into the eighth fetter. you know. So I'm aware of that. It's just it's there's no. I mean, even though we've talked about it before, still there's not a clear sense or understanding of how. And again, I got to say it because I know we've talked about it at least twice.
Okay.
There's not a clear understanding or sense of where the line is that you go, okay, those are the first three fetters. You're done. Time to work elsewhere. You know, maybe you might need to come back to it later on, and something more subtle can be rooted out. But for right now, this is as done as you can get.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think it's because we don't really have a clear, definitive line for it. In LU, we have, 5 or 6 questions that we ask people to have a general sense of their experience. But I can't tell you the number of people that I've spoken with who have come through LU and been like, I don't know, like there's still something there. There's still something that feels like they're a little bit uncertain, but they answer all the questions correctly.
well, it's funny you should say that because 2 Thursdays ago I was on a meeting and Leona was there, and I'd mentioned something about last July when there was that that moment of insight, and I mentioned this to the LU guide, and they sent the questions. I answered them, and they said, "You're done. You're through the gate." Well, I mentioned that to Leona, and she said, and you probably know this, but for anyone who's hearing this, just to make sure there's not any misunderstanding of what this might mean, apparently she and Christiana Mickelberger are pretty close. She's helping to edit or format the book that Christiane's about to put out. So anyway, when she said this, she said that Christiane had said that a lot of times where they call having somebody having passed the gate or passed through the gate is actually premature.
Yeah.
So, and I guess I should also add, no one's meaning that as a criticism of LU. It's just, sometimes Christiane's sense is that there are times where they say that someone is now done with that when they've made that call prematurely.
I do
So,
suspect it's also the case. There are so many because it's the process is it's so okay. It's such a non-specific process. We don't really even know what we mean when we say the first fetter, this, stream entry, Kensho, seeing through the self, all of that.
Oh, I meant
All
to
of
turn
that.
that
That's the
off.
sound that happens when it happens. So, and then you're
That's great. Hopefully that should stop. I meant to turn that off before we started. I was watching one of our videos from a while back, and I heard that in the actual video. Well, let's put that to an end to that.
thank you for that. That's really, really funny. No, but we have experiences that are similar for different people for thousands of years that they've experienced. Whether those things are, whether that experience tends to be a permanent shift where it really creates some long-lasting change is dependent person to person. You can have an experience where you clearly see that there's no self there, there's no control, there's no one doing anything, there's no such thing as responsibility, there's no such thing as free will. You can have all of these experiences that seem clear as day. And then we think, oh, okay, I'm done. Seen through it. Yay, great. But oftentimes it's an experience that doesn't last into some, it doesn't remain stable, and it not only doesn't remain stable, it doesn't really remain accessible going forward. And so I think what we really are talking about is something where you have an insight, and it might be all at once, it might be a slow dawning kind of thing. Again, it's different for different people. Once you have that kind of insight where you really truly recognize these things, not just on a conceptual level, not just like, yeah, it makes sense, but where it really feels absolutely true for a bit, it's being able to access that at different points throughout the day where you can drop back and drop that feeling of, even if like right now you're having a dialogue with somebody and you feel pretty concentrated, you feel pretty located somewhere, you feel like, yeah, I feel like Darrell again, I feel like this is, if you can in that moment like kind of step back and be like, oh, right, you feel the sensations that are there, you feel, you see the images and the sounds and all of that stuff, and it just goes like, whew, like the what was taken to be the illusion of self is breakable at will. Basically, you can still get trapped into the feeling of it because that has been the experience for decades, and it just becomes sort of your default way of being if you're not recognizing it. But there's the ability to just go and step back, and it's having that, fifth story view, as Pernilla calls it, or that, think of it as, just for me it feels kind of like this, just pulling back, spreading out kind of.
Yes.
And then that's what we're talking about, where you can keep doing that until it becomes more and more of your experience, perhaps. But it's really about not being bought into, all of my thoughts are real, and as soon as they come up, I am just sucked right into them, fully believing everything, fully believing my experience is true. It's the breakdown of all of that. And not so that we're living in some mystical wonderland or something, but just so it's like you have this extra dimension of spaciousness to go to, or this impersonal way of experiencing life that you didn't have access to before. Even if it's not a permanent thing, it's there. And I think, the problem is because we're getting closer now to maybe ish, finding that there are like brain correlates to it, and that it's not getting one's vibrations to a higher level so that they transcend to a different dimension of being or something like that, or whatever the beliefs have been before about what's actually happening. It's not just, purification of spirit until it becomes light enough, or whatever the thing is. It's like something is actually happening in the way that the brain functions. And whether it is, I think it's in a complex group of regions that things are happening. And so maybe for you, the way your brain is, when you have certain experiences like that, certain parts of the brain down regulate more than others. They come more offline or more online, depending. And somebody else's brain might work slightly differently. So they might get a slightly different version of that same experience. So
Yeah.
I think we're just not able to say it is this absolutely clear cut. I mean, I remember saying, back when I was going through all that, it would be so easy if it was like, okay, when the first fetter is broken, my skin turns green. Then, when the fifth fetter is broken, my hair falls out, and like just like have it be some clear, visible sign that the thing has changed. But I really don't think it's that way. And why we're so adamant about saying that it's not like, you know, you you have to be so completely done with 1 through 3 before you move on to the other stuff, because the other stuff is all part of your experience. You are experiencing all 10 fetters every day,
Right.
on and off, moment by moment. Something is in view. There's something here which is coloring your experience that you can look into. And I think the more we're doing, like the more because we're now working on the seventh fetter stuff for the curriculum, and it's like the more we're talking about these things and really exploring the ways to make them useful and integrate them into your life. I think what we're really finding is that working with any of the fetters, the fifth fetter stuff, fourth and fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, they're all 10th, they're all giving you ways to split apart your experience to where the instinct that I have, and just the feedback that we've gotten from other people who are doing some of these things, it's like doing sixth fetter exercises sometimes will further break down any sense of first fetter self that's there.
Interesting.
Doing seventh fetter stuff with the making something out of nothing. Pernilla's doing a series of videos right now where she's using that with every one of the previous six fetters. So it's really being able to then use these tools to investigate your experience in the moment and dissolve them into a way that kind of affects all of them. So I think it's so important to not get on that linear thinking that it has to be, I have to get the stamp of approval on Fetter One before I can move on to anything else. Because you are living and experiencing all the others. And I think personally for you, it really sounds like you are through Fetter One, or at least, through enough of it that you should be more than comfortable working with everything else.
Okay. Well, there's one thought about that, and to use a phrase you used a minute ago, because it's true, it's an appropriate way to say it, is that the instinct I keep having is that there is something around Fetter 1, 2, and 3 that is looking for a more permanent shift.
Mhm.
And the one thing, well, the one thing, there is something, and that could be a number of things, but there is this something comprised of however many other smaller things that is sort of an impediment to that, because it continues to generate a fairly strong sense of someone. And what that is, or what it seems to be based on experience of the last 6 or 8 months or so, is there is stuff from early childhood
Mhm.
that, and we've been working with some of it, and
Mhm.
there's been a lot of really good success in terms of releasing a lot of that. But it's become, especially today it became really obvious that there's still more of that stuff there.
Yeah.
And there are other things too that have pointed to this, and that in releasing that, that would not be generating this this strong, well, maybe strong is overdoing it, but it generating this palpable sense of someone.
Mm. There is definitely something to be said for continuing to dive into the second fetter stuff, the emotional work, the traumas, the beliefs, the shadow work, all of that stuff is incredibly important to continue working with. Not to say though that it's not okay to continue working with fetters 5 and 6 and 7 and those things at the
Yeah.
same.
Oh yeah, I'm not
It's
opposed to that. I
yeah.
don't have a black and white boundary of, shouldn't do this until have you've gotten to point X with this. But at the same time, it does feel like there's some stuff there that needs to be recognized, in that, if that can be brought up and released, that some of this stickiness around this first three fetter stuff would not be anywhere near as sticky.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. It- I would the second fetter stuff, the emotional stuff, definitely makes some of the other stuff seem rather sticky. It's hard to say that the seeing through the self alone generally does not make that stuff less sticky. It's kind of the other way around. Fetter two uh, emotional stuff really makes the first fetter beliefs stronger because it's constantly reinforcing
Yes.
that thing.
I must have said it poorly because that's what I was
Oh,
trying to
oh,
get
I'm sorry. I'm
to.
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I misunderstood then. I was thinking the other way around that the Fetter One stuff was making the emotional stuff seem stickier and more
No,
real.
it seems like there's a lot of this emotional stuff, which I've started to be, it's starting to become more apparent that there's something that wants some attention.
Yeah,
And that emotional stuff, that second fetter stuff, is what is kind of the engine that's driving some of these things.
absolutely true. And there's no way to say that that is, you know, totally expended. There's no point at which we're gonna say, okay, you're done. Never look into your shadow stuff again. Now that could be decades down the road. Something else is going to spontaneously pop up. It's not to say that you're doing the work for decades necessarily, but be aware that it's something you can always be vigilant with, that something still will just, I mean, we have that with ourselves where just all of a sudden, something will come up that's like something from her childhood or something from my childhood or something that just hasn't been seen in a different way. It hasn't been let out. There's like something just gives rise to it. But how we work with it now is, instead of making stories out of it or going into it or making a big thing, it's like just feeling it, letting it be there, doing what needs to be done, whether it's giving, love and acceptance and space towards it or whatever else. But it just basically flows through, and then, that's the thing. It doesn't create a whole narrative where it creates a whole bunch of selfing and all of that. It's just, oh, here's an interesting thing that just came up in the body. That was unexpected. That was kind of an interesting. Oh, I just got a random memory of this time, and that felt like that, but it's not made into something more than it is. It's just, oh, that's there. So now do with it what we couldn't have done with it back when we were kids.
Well, I like that idea. I mean, it's nice to think that you don't always have to do a lot of this very. involved, which makes it sound like something more than it actually is, but where you have to stop, take some time, set aside, and work with it in a very specific and directed way. It's nice to think that eventually that's not necessary. But having said that, there are two things that continue to keep rearing their head, and my sense is they're related. One of them is something that is still to this day very mysterious, and it has something to do with loss. And I don't know how it's connected, but it seems to be what's underneath these issues or these things that come up that, they're almost freaking perennial. I mean, case in point, I'd mentioned to you in that email a while back about my daughter's boyfriend.
Yeah.
And I went through a point in time of being, in spite of everything that's happened, I got to a point where there was just peace with it. And then suddenly it was gone. And now it's, gritting my teeth and trying to figure out what to do with this burning resentment, and having to try to find a way to interact with them without saying or doing anything to create more complication. And can we be done with this?
I know. But it's a resistance. There's a resistance inherent in that, not wanting to feel the resistance, not wanting to feel the gritting of the teeth and the frustration and all of that. So it's like multiple levels of stuff there. Can't we just be rid of this? Is itself a reactive stance to, okay, you're in a situation right now where on one level it's not an optimal situation that you would prefer to be in, but you can't you can look at what arises naturally, this sort of gearing up, that the sort of the fight sense, right? Like you're feeling like your daughter is in some sort of a threatened situation. You feel this kind of primal urge to fight, grit your teeth, tense up, that's in response to it. But then there's a reaction to that coming up, and there are stories about it which are prolonging it and making it into something more than just an initial whew that clenches up in the body. So it's the belief in the stories around it. It's the amplifying of it through whatever you think is going on in the situation, whether you're doing more self-talk about um you know all the problems of him and why it shouldn't be the way and how you wish you would be able to get rid of him and all of that. But that's all just feeding into the thing. The initial sensation isn't a problem on its own. We can look into perhaps why it is coming up, but the initial coming up itself can be worked with. Let me say that again. The resistance to the initial arising sensations can be worked with themselves. So why is it not okay to feel this, protective frustration about this guy who's clearly setting off alarm bells for you, and for good reason?
Yeah. Well, I want to add to that. That's part of it. The other part of it is, and I think it has less to do with in fact, I think it has nothing to do with my daughter and everything to do with me, is that he's a tremendous know-it-all. And so there are two issues side by side that are generating all of this.
Yeah.
So,
So that one is definitely a you thing.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So for that, you can be looking into what it is about him being a know-it-all that really pisses you off. Is it that it makes you feel insecure in some way? Is it because you see that tendency in you and you very much dislike it? Don't approve of your own streak of know-it-allness? What is it about that that really brings you to that point of that guy?
You know, the first impulse was the second thing you said. And then I stopped and really looked into it, and I realized that there may have been some of that to whatever degree when I was his age,
Hmm.
and maybe even for some time after. Unless unless people aren't being truthful with me, the reports I'm getting back now are that that I people don't perceive me as a know-it-all,
Yeah.
and that jived with my sense about Darrell. So I thought, well, okay, that was your first. That was sort of the first flush. Was that makes you think of you, but that doesn't seem to be who you are now. So then, what is it? And it didn't occur to me to ask anything about being insecure, but and that's a good question. But as of yet, I haven't been able to come up with a satisfactory answer.
One
And
thing that I want to though is that it doesn't matter whether other people find you to be a know-it-all or not. Do
okay,
you feel like you have any sort of know-it-all tendencies that you might not actually act on? They might not come out of your mouth. Other people might not see it. But is this something that pops up? Are you internally correcting other people without actually verbalizing it or having that "Ah, that guy, like I how does he not know that, or that urge to jump in? Does that sort of thing come up in you?
yeah, without actually acting on it or saying it, those sorts of thoughts and feelings will show up, and they're usually set aside if they're expressed. It's done in such a way to try to make sure that the other person's to respect and acknowledge that the other person is knows these things, is intelligent, experienced, knowledgeable, whatever. To not diminish them in any way.
Yeah.
But but yeah,
Which
it
is
still comes up.
it's lovely, to do that, but recognize that that's also coming from a place where you have an inherent bias towards that kind of behavior. You wouldn't try to stop yourself from having a certain behavior if you thought it was a good thing. You
Okay.
used to be a know-it-all, and now you're not a know-it-all anymore. So you've said being a
Or-
know-it-all is not okay. So now I've wiped that out of my personality, but the tendency can still be there, and there's still a bias against that kind of behavior. So whether you see it in you now, whether you there's still an issue with seeing it in other people because there's still this bias. You're not okay with being a know-it-all on some level. I
Yeah,
want to get rid of that part of me. I've tried. It maybe is still lingering, and so there's that resistance to that being a part of you.
I've gone from being an overt know-it-all to a covert know-it-all.
Love it. That's really, really good. That's really, really good.
Well, that explains that first flush around it when trying to figure out why it was such a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And okay, because how did it come up? I'm trying to remember exactly the way the thought was phrased. Can't recall what the question was, but the answer was something like, "The problem is he reminds you of yourself."
Yeah. That's generally the issue. Usually when we have a problem with somebody, it's because they remind us of ourselves, some part of ourselves that we may or may not acknowledge, but that we definitely do not accept.
Say that again about acknowledging and accepting it.
Yeah, yeah, we might acknowledge it. We might know that it's a part of us, or it might not. It might be that, we really hate bossy people and we just have a complete blind spot to the fact that we boss other people around all the time. Or it might be something like you're experiencing there where I'm aware that it's been an issue and I've really worked at it and I think I've gotten past it, but there's still something there. But it's whether we acknowledge that we have it or not, there's definitely a fact that we do not accept it in
So,
ourselves or other people.
so we acknowledge it but don't accept it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I acknowledge the fact that I'm a repentant know-it-all. And I've done my best to fight it, but I really don't accept it. If there's any trace of it left, I do not accept it, and I do not accept it in other people either, because I think it's a terrible trait that should be stricken from the planet.
And the thing that's the real kicker in all of this is that I understand, and when I say that, I mean that in not just the intellectual sense, but truly deep down. I understand why this kid is this way because he comes from an environment that has left him with so broken and such negative self-esteem, probably self-hatred, that he's just clamoring, day in, day out to try to shore himself up and secure himself from the world.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And it's good to have that acknowledgement and have that it sort of inform the reactions or the potential reactions toward him, but it doesn't address the fact that his behavior still reflects something in you, which is very unwelcome.
yeah.
And that's where you get to look. He becomes a gift to you in that way because it's a mirror for you to really look into something that otherwise would have gone unnoticed.
So that kind of points to the same thing for myself in that it's funny because there are a lot of parallels between his mom and my mom.
Mm,
That those behaviors for Darrell came from a very similar place.
mhm.
Um, um, so what do you do with it?
You can have that. Well, first of all, you can have the love and compassion for, little Darrell, just like we talked about, and
Hmm.
you can have the same love and compassion for him at that level. If you can do the kind of metta practices for him, just as you do for little Darrell and your current Darrell, that you recognize that there's no inherent person in him who is a complete, menace. It's that causes and conditions have come forth in such a way that this person has the personality that they do, or that this person is the personality that they are. That said, if the person does have a toxic, dangerous, or problematic personality in some way, it still doesn't mean that you have to allow them to be, in the family, in the life, all of that. So it's not just accepting of this that sort of a circumstance, but it informs it in a way that allows you to be loving and compassionate towards him without coming from a place of reactivity, which is just not useful.
Well, yeah, you kind of said a mouthful there because that's the tricky thing is that those same things that appear to give rise to the know-it-all also give rise to him treating our daughter in such a way
Mhm.
that it it's having an effect on her sense of self-worth and her self-esteem
Yeah.
on a regular basis, doing and saying things that just diminish her. And this has gone on for years, and it seems to be have had an effect on her
Of
and
course.
having an effect, still. And
Of course.
so loving kindness, but at the same time, you know, quit treating my daughter like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just that thing where you can still be effective in the relative level. You can still take action and do things, but it's not coming from a place of internal blind reactivity. You know where it's coming from. It's coming from trying to keep your daughter safe, and for the good of her, not because it pushes some juvenile button in you that makes you hate him because he reminds you of you. They're two unrelated things that can be conflated into just this guy's a total tool. I want him out of my life. Yeah, that might be true in a way, but not for the reason that you think it is, necessarily, if you're coming at it from that reactive kind of place. So this way here, it gives you a more clear view of why you don't want him in your life, so that you know that it's kind of untainted by your own personal biases, and that it's just the fact that he is not treating her the way that she should be treated. He's actually causing her emotional, psychological issues that she's going to have to probably spend years undoing, hopefully, in the future. All of that, which is plenty of reason to not have him in your life or her life.
Yeah.
But it's just being aware that that is the reason why. And it's not because he's a know it all. And it really pisses me off when he's a know it all.
Right.
And you can do it from a very clean place if you're not coming from that kind of reaction. When you address him, when you work with the situation or whatever it is, you're much more effective if you're coming from that calm, rational, okay, these are the
Yeah.
reasons why he shouldn't be here, not, that doesn't do anything. And
Right.
that just creates conflict unnecessarily and makes you feel worse and irrational, and it's just ineffective.
Okay. So, thinking about it, it seems like maybe it's getting to a place of trying to find more self-sufficiency when it comes to dealing with these sorts of second fetter matters. But I'm not really sure how to do that. I mean, I've wondered more than once before how it is you have learned how to do this stuff, because you're very adept at it.
Thank you.
And I don't know if I did all the same things you did over time. I don't know if I would have that level of deftness that you do. I mean, you know, admittedly, the one thing I've learned over the years, I've been told it for a long time and finally recently accepted it, is that I'm what people oftentimes refer to as a sensitive,
Yeah.
or a empath.
Yeah. Totally.
So I've got that to my advantage, that, I can read people and I can intuit things about what's going on with someone or between, a couple of people, what have you. Still, I've given consideration to how did he learn to do this stuff? Because I'm hoping that going through this process myself, will eventually leave me with some of those skills, because I would like to. And when I say this, I've got to qualify it. It's not something that I care to turn into a cottage industry, or,
Sure.
ever wind up like, what's his name, Eckhart Tolle, or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But it would be nice to be able to help people work their way through this process.
It is. Yeah, I totally get that. Um, it's been one of those things where I think some of it comes because I had a deep interest in psychology growing up. So in high school and college, I took a bunch of psych courses, and I used to read psychology books for fun. And, I think that was kind of just bred a lot of that in and kind of locked a lot of that in. I've always been super interested in that sort of thing. And then having done all of the different stuff that I've done, and having, just heard about other ways of working with these things, it's all kind of blended together. And then, some of it I've gotten from Pernilla and just other people along the way. And it's just it's what has worked for me. It seems intuitively, you know, functional and easy. And I think there is something where once you do work with it, you just see it from the inside of how it functions in a way where it's that resolving of what we, like what I was talking about before with the seventh fetter stuff, where we're really resolving the the strong conceptuality about things, that making something out of nothing, where it really is like, you know, you can, when we're working with it for ourselves, it feels like we're working with something that is really real initially. Like, this is my story. This is me working through something. This really happened to me. This is really what's, my cross to bear, and I'm really fighting with it and really doing my best to get past it. And that all feels really true. And the more those hooks release, the more you start to recognize that, oh, wait a minute, I don't really even remember most of my past. I can't even verify that the things I do remember definitely happened or happened the way that I think they did. I don't know, like, or I clearly do know that none of that is happening right now in this moment. I, I can see that what I think is happening in this moment can really be broken down into so many parts that have nothing to do with what I think is really happening. So, meaning, if I think right now that I'm really annoyed with my daughter's boyfriend because he's a know-it-all, okay, well, or even that he's just because I'm annoyed with him because I think he's a bad person, breaking that down into, okay, well, it's because he's a know-it-all. Okay, what does that even mean? Why is that an issue like we just went through? But then
Right.
recognizing that even your resistance in that moment to him is just sensations and thoughts. You have sensations in the body that are calling to some sort of action, whether it's fight, freeze, flee, fawn, whatever it is. There's some sort of push to do something, and that those sensations themselves do not themselves do anything. They're just effectively a call to arms that is not actually doing anything. And then you have a bunch of thoughts that are coming up, some of which are about this current moment, some of which that are about the current moment, but many of which that are about times that are no longer relevant. Many of which are about, um, reactions based off of things that are not here and have no relation to this situation. And so it's just recognizing all of these things, like what is actually here in the moment. There is somebody in my house. I am having a group of sensations in the body. I am having thoughts that are saying he's a know-it-all, he's toxic, he's a bad person, but I understand how he got that way. And then recognizing that all of those are thoughts, all of the justifications about the way that he is, all of the justifications about why you should not like him, all those justifications about why you feel the way you do and how you have to change that because I don't like feeling this way and really just want to be able to be equanimous whether he's here or not, even though I would much rather him not be here. All of that stuff is additional layers of thought that have nothing to do with the bare bones of the situation, which are that there are sensations, and there's a body, and there's another body in some sort of a location in space. And it sounds very simplistic to put it that way, but the actual experience of it can have that, like we talked about earlier, that sort of spaciousness where you're back behind it. It's not a
Mhm.
personal part of the experience. There's just this openness in which all of this can happen in a way that is perfectly okay in that moment. It is okay that he's there. It's okay for these sensations to be here. It's okay for everything to be exactly as it is. And it, in that moment, does not need to be different than it is, which is great because it can't be. Nothing could be different than it is. And that is what we're going for.
Okay.
Everything else is an additional layer of conceptualization that it should be different. He should be a different person. He should be out of our lives. I should not be as reactive as I am. I should be thinking more benevolent things about him and be much more kind in my thoughts. my daughter should be, should be seeing through his ruse. She should not want to see him anymore. All of these things are not currently happening now. Yes, going forward, you can maybe make changes. You can, things will happen, hopefully, that change the situation for the better. But it's recognizing that in this moment, there is a way to be with everything where you are not reactive. You are not coming at it from a place of uh antagonism, where you are pitting yourself against the moment, like you know how it should be.
Hmm.
You know it would be better if it was the way that you think it should be. All of that. We let all of that go and just be with the raw experience of this moment. And that, for that period, changes everything in our experience of it.
Hmm. Something that something that is starting to kind of become, I wouldn't say clear, but something that there's beginning to be an understanding about, and I'm not really sure how to articulate it with regards to that or anything, is that whenever there's an experience, it seems like it's so hard to talk about, but I think you'll understand and maybe you'll be able to clarify it. For instance, with the situation with him, there's this dynamic is not really the right word, but there's something that seems to come into being where there's an experience and there's something that is seen or recognized or thought or heard or somehow is known, and it creates this situation of there's this, so if there's this, there must be something perceiving it.
Mm.
And so the understanding that these moments of experience seem to create a sense of someone.
Mm.
I don't know how much sense that makes, but it's hard to talk about. So,
I mean, it sounds very sixth fetter, if I'm understanding you correctly. That the idea that because there is something here, either in the like emotionally charged setting of my
mhm.
daughter's boyfriend, or just in the fact that I'm sitting here silently meditating, and yet it feels like there is something which is perceiving the wall in front of me that I'm staring at,
Yeah,
or that there's something that feels like I'm perceiving the birds that are outside the window right now.
right.
Yeah, that's the sixth fetter.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's what we're working with there. That's not like a first fetter issue.
Okay. Well, then I'll look into, because I've got a couple of her videos saved on that. I'll ask her about that, or I'll look into that. I want to ask you about something
Yeah.
going back to where this started a minute ago with this idea of trying to get some self-sufficiency around working with second fetter stuff.
Mhm.
Something that I had forgotten about, but it came back to me today, seemingly out of nowhere, and it feels like a biggie, but I don't really know what it is.
Okay.
All I have is, and I'll tell you what the thing is, and maybe you can help me to figure out or learn to understand how to work with this on my own.
Mhm.
Is when I was really small. I mean, I was probably 4, maybe pushing it 5. My mom took me to the grocery store with her one day, and as we were leaving, there was a soda fountain in the store, which that used to actually exist back then,
Uh-huh.
and she bought me something, like some sort of soda or float or something, but it was in this
Yeah.
glass container. You know, you don't see that kind of stuff much anymore. But anyway,
Right.
so it's in this really nice glass container. Obviously you take it home and keep it. And as we were walking out of the store, and I'm getting so emotional just recalling it and describing it out loud, was this sense that I could drop that
Mm.
and it would fall to the ground and it would shatter and it would be gone. And there was this profound sense of loss and that here was something that my mom, for all of the difficulties that would show up between us in the coming years at that point, that here was some sort of expression of affection, and I would be dashing that to the ground and it would be gone. Fast forward to today, I don't have any problem with crying, but if I do it, I won't be able to talk. So
Uh-huh.
that's the difficulty. The crazy little black dachshund that you've seen, Sweetie,
Yeah.
people have bonds with their dogs.
Oh yeah.
There's something there that even transcends that. Just to give you a sense of the emotional importance, I will briefly digress and let you know that when we brought her home a year ago, I was driving. I was having nothing to do with the dog. We got out of the car to come into the house, and Susanna was holding her, and she handed her to me. She said, "Here, hold her for a moment." And when she did, we made eye contact. She looked at me, I looked at her, and it was Susanna was there to witness it. If I'm glad, because otherwise I would think, no, I just made that up,
Yeah.
because it's so unbelievable. It was like this laser beam connection. She looked at me, and there was this moment of recognition and knowing, and it with both of us.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was inclined to explain things in terms of past lives, I might go to that for an explanation. I don't know what it is. All I know is there was this bond
Yep.
that happened there. Something went off. There was this big charge, and that dog has been bonded to me in a profound way ever since. And I feel very strongly about her.
Yeah.
So I'm driving down the road today, and she's in the car with me, and the window's down because she likes to look out the window. And I thought, and it harkened right back to that moment when I was a little kid. I could just take her and throw out the window, and that'd be the end of it. And I would lose this thing that means so much to me.
Yeah. Okay.
And so here this is. I don't know what the hell it is, and I don't know what to do with it.
First of all, feeling it and acknowledging that it's okay to feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is okay to feel it.
It is good.
There's not a problem with feeling it. It's just there's this very deep sense that this has been somehow creating a lot of what has shown up in this lifetime. I'm not even really sure how. It's just that's the strong instinct, is that whatever that is, that has been driving a lot of behavior and reactivity. So,
Does it, I mean, the immediate things that come to mind are this kind of existential grief that we often feel because we have the awareness that everything is impermanent,
yes,
that there is nothing to grab onto, that everyone that we love and everything that we love is one day going to die or break or somehow no longer be.
right,
And it is a uniquely human thing as far as we know, and maybe other animals also experience it, but to have that conceptualization that what is here can one day not be here.
right,
And then you're currently feeling something which is not actually happening. It's an interesting hypothetical that you're feeling, right? Like in when you were a kid, it was the how would you feel if this did break, but it hadn't actually broken. It was the acknowledgement of the fragility of life, the fragility of everything that you're experiencing, and how it could at any moment be taken from you.
Yeah.
And the same with your dog. The dog, thankfully, is still healthy and alive and there.
Yeah.
But we can put ourselves in that position where we feel all the grief of that loss. So where it really comes down is the what we talk about in like the ninth fetter of that clinging to impermanence or clinging to permanence, I should say, that resistance towards the fact that everything is constantly changing and that loving something, someone is inherently a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
But we're putting ourselves at risk of feeling pain when they go. And it's not something that we um awakening isn't about becoming numb to emotions like grief and loss and love. We can have it can be informed by the recognition that there isn't a separateness there, that the person in effect is still living on in some way inside of your memory and your mind and all of that, and that the things that they have done in life have been part of this complete web of everything in the universe, where everything they do has sent out ripples of causality that are still, for eternity going to be having some sort of effect on the world. And that's all really lovely, but it doesn't necessarily address our particular feeling of loss and pain.
Right.
Um, and I don't think that's something that we necessarily want to spiritually bypass and enlighten away. Like there's even a Zen story of the monk who's the Zen master who's I forget who it was who died, and he was sitting there crying on the floor, and the implication was, well, Zen master, you're not supposed to cry, and he's like, crying is happening. It's this perfectly valid response to a situation where it's just unencumbered. And so if there's a case where, you lose the dog, you break the glass, whatever it is that happens, crying happens, crying happens.
Right.
It's just about not adding more story to it, not making it more and worse and into more suffering than it naturally would be, which is what we very often do.
Or even making it personal because it's not.
Also that, because usually when somebody dies, it's about how how I miss them, how they are, it's like we tend to, when somebody after somebody dies, go through a large portion of our life not really thinking about them, but then we'll have a thought that, oh, they would have loved this, they should have been here for this, that, and then that starts the whole, oh, now I'm at odds with reality. They're not here, but I would like them to be here. And now the sadness comes because I want things to be other than they are. And it brings up this whole alternate timeline that never existed, that we're now comparing our current timeline against, and deciding that, and it really creates all of this missing and suffering. Whereas
Right.
to be, we talk about this occasionally, and it could be taken the wrong way, but realistically, right now, when you're in a room and you have no access to seeing anybody else in your life, any dogs or people or anybody else, they could all be dead or, completely gone into some other void right now. Like you could have twilight zoned into another dimension where the only thing that exists is the room that you're in, and you have absolutely no concept of that right now. And so in your experience right now, everybody else is gone. Everybody that you love and hope to cling on to for forever is not currently here. And then when you come out of the room, and if they are hopefully still there, then you can, really embrace them with gratitude and enjoyment for the fact that they are still there, because it's not a given. And if anything, you can use that to inform your experience to really not take people and everyone else for granted, but to really appreciate the fact that it is a potentially fleeting relationship, all of them.
Yeah, it, easily said, tends to be a tall order because of falling back to autopilot.
But it's just being aware of when those thoughts come up, when that feeling comes up, and it's useful to really look into or to feel into what is it that is so disconcerting and uncomfortable about the impermanent nature of everything. Do you feel that that brings up, if you bring up the fact that everything, you could lose absolutely everything that you love? Like there is no solid ground on which to stand regarding any experience or possession or person in your life. What does that bring up?
It's sort of counterintuitive, or at least it may sound that way to some people, but it brought up an incredible spaciousness.
Hmm, yeah, not counterintuitive to me.
Well, yeah, I didn't think necessarily for you, but and probably for many people, no, but some people would hear that and what? Yeah, that's where it took things. That's the direction it went in. Is you know this profound lightness, totally unencumbered, everything wide open.
Yeah. So how does that sadness, that deep sadness of the potential of breaking the glass or losing your dog, how does that fit into that open spaciousness?
How does it fit into that? I don't know how to answer that.
Don't necessarily do it intellectually.
Okay.
Feel into when you bring up that idea of that story from when you were a child.
How does it fit into it? It fits into it in the sense that um, they're all just things that come and go.
But what is it that makes that situation different? Or the situation with your dog? Because if the idea of the loss of everything in your life brings a feeling of spaciousness and okayness, why is it that those things bring up a feeling of sadness?
Well, now the one when I was a kid, that's always been a mystery. I've reflected upon that. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but at one point in time, it was something that it had come up once many years ago, and it was something that was reflected upon from time to time, and then it kind of got lost in the flow of things until today. But today, like so many times before, it's a mystery. Now, as to Sweetie, it is the story that's associated with it. That's what seems to create the unhappiness at the thought of, the sadness at the thought of that loss.
Stories are powerful things.
Yeah, they are. Language is very hypnotic.
It is. Is there a feeling where if you lost the story, that it would be a sense of grieving or a sense of loss?
Hmm.
Does the story actually change your relationship in the moment with her?
It seems to, yeah.
Do you, when you interact with her, like in the moment, are you thinking about that story all the time, or is it feeding into? I have a lot of dogs, but you're my favorite. I have a bond with you that's really.
Yeah,
So,
it's sort of, it's not really thought explicitly in language, but there is sort of this sense of, here's this funny little relationship, you know. Speaking of which, pardon me for just one moment. Go on.
I think she knew she's being talked about.
She doesn't even know it.
Uh-huh.
And her brother's going to have to whine, so, well, it'll be. So, but yeah, in the moment, there's a sense. Like I said, it's not explicitly in words that are formed in the mind, but there's some sort of awareness of the story.
So I would encourage you to feel into that, the how the story is actually, like, in the sense, in the moment when you're cuddling with her or interacting with her, how much of it is just a raw being, and it might be a very loving being together. It might be a very heartfelt, snuggly, good feeling.
Right.
But see if there's any undercurrent there that's trying to make it happen because of that bond, like because of the idea that you had that laser connection, that moment of that thing. How I'm trying to get to the, like, the experience of it is lovely, but it's a new fresh experience every moment that you're with her, and it doesn't have to be predicated on any previous moment that was there, whether it was the moment of meeting or the moment of something that happened 6 months ago. Each time you're with her can be a fresh experience, which is not directly correlated with this, you know, pre- principal story of when you two, locked eyes. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is being able to have an experience in the moment with her without bringing all of this stuff from a previous time into that moment.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
other words, have that moment right then and there without anything there except what is there.
Yeah, exactly. And like I was trying to say, you still will probably have some very loving, cozy relationship with her. It's not to undercut any of that,
Sure.
but it's to make it so that you recognize that this moment is just this moment, and then it passes on, something changes, you're with a different dog, you're by yourself, then you're with her again, and it's this other cozy moment, and then it's gone, and then you're with somebody else and you're doing something else. And life is constantly changing like that. And so you can be aware of and grateful for those moments that you're with her and things are really good. But you can also recognize that when you're not, that things are still happening. Things, life hasn't completely derailed or changed, or um, back to the world outside of your room might be a void right now with everybody else already having disappeared. That we don't want to have to make more out of all of this than it is in the moment.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a tough thing to talk about because it's like I don't want to come across like it's good to be just detached and cold-hearted, and because that's not what I'm saying at all.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, good. It's just the it can actually be useful. There's a version of the see hear feel practice that I really like, where they call it flow, but it's actually the change. Are you familiar with that?
I am, but it's been a long time since I've worked with it, so my recollection isn't really clear.
It's effectively, while you're doing it, you pick any whichever sense field you're paying attention to, and it can change like you do the regular practice. So you sit there and you allow the attention to wander freely from one thing to another, whether it's your visual field, your auditory field, your physical sense field, and you acknowledge any time something is changed
Mhm.
or moving. So you're recognizing and you label it flow. So you're looking, out at the view and you see like the tree branches moving and you recognize flow. There's change there. Nothing is stable in that motion. You feel sensations in the body and you feel that it's tingling and there's a little change, a little move here, a little move there, and that's flow. You hear sounds and the birds are chirping and then they stop and then they're chirping and it's a chirp, 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 and there's flow, there's movement in all of that. And then they also have a version where I forget the word that you use for it, but basically you label every time something stops. So
Oh yeah.
when you're hearing it, and the label doesn't really matter if as long as you're paying attention to like the end you could use or something like that. When you recognize that there was an end where there was a pause in the sound coming out of my mouth, and it's just end. And there's your eyes blink for a moment and it's like the visual field ends for a second and then pops back open again and you see again and then that ends again. Things like that where you recognize the stopping and the starting so that you recognize that everything is constantly bursting into life anew, coming to an end. Everything is constantly dying and being reborn in a way where it takes us out of the mentality that we have that everything is this sort of big, permanent, lasting end that we tend to fear when we have this existential grief. That there is a me, and one day that me is going to die, and that's going to be the end of it. There is, everybody who I love, everything that I own, everything that's going to break or die. It's just the end of it. And it's recognizing that even if we don't take it to the conclusion that they are going to be reborn in exactly that form or in some other form, it's just noticing that there's a constant death and a constant rebirth, a constant movement, a constant change every single moment in so many different ways. And it's all happening at the same time. And we, as we take ourselves, are not separated from that. We are every bit a part of this entire web of coming and going, arising and passing, um, flow and movement, as everything else is the tree branches and the leaves growing out and falling off. It's just all part of this same exact expression. And having that kind of, where we don't have to take it to the like eighth fetter thing of, I am one with God, I am the cosmos. We don't have to take it to that personal place, but we can recognize that everything that is happening here, the physical sensations in the body, the thoughts that are arising, the scents that are being picked up, the tastes in the mouth, the sounds that are being heard and processed, and all of that, every part of that is in no way separated from anything else in the universe. There is nothing here that is in any way separate from your dog in that way. And there is just absolute connection on that level because everything is causally interrelated and interacting in some variety of different ways. And that there's no clear cut beginning or end of anything, that your cells are constantly dying and being reborn, that, the body is always being refashioned, and the neurons that are making up your experience are being rewired and in some cases replaced. And everything that we take to be ourselves is constantly just part of this giant flow. And so it's really pointing us to more and more towards that kind of realization, where the minutia of thinking that there is a finite piece of glass that is going to shatter, and that glass is the representation for my mother's love for me, for something that I love being able to be taken from me, that idea suddenly starts to lose its grip, because we can see that is just glass. Her love is something completely distant from that. It has nothing to do with that actual glass. It was in the gesture, it was in how you received it, it was in how you experienced it. That love is coming from you, that you felt that love from her was something that you were able to create and feel in your bubble of experience.
Yeah.
So there's no fear of being able to lose that from losing an outside source. The love that you feel for Sweetie is not something that is ever going to go away, whether she's there or not, because that's coming from within you. That connection you have is still feelable in that way, whether she's there or not in that particular form. And as you felt that okayness, that kind of relieved spaciousness, with the realization that everything can and will change, die, break, go away in some way. It's based or tied in with that understanding that there is no one distinct end of anything. That it's just like we talked about with knowing when the first fetter is completely gone and it's time to move on. There's no clear cut end of anything. It's all a process, which is very, very messy and without any sort of identifiable individual parts. We're talking about a very complex process that is just recognizable in its distinct appearances. And those distinct appearances are constantly changing, which is why, going back to the first fetter thing again, there is no solitary aspect of you which could be permanently past an imaginary thing that we call a fetter. It's still just concepts feeding into concepts. There are no fetters. There are just types of identification. And there's nobody who is locked into those fetters, and there's nobody who is identifying. There are just patterns of identification that are appearing, or there's patterns of identification that are appearing less frequently, or there's perhaps patterns of identification that are not happening. But none of that indicates anything about the you, the being, the permanence of it, or the location of it, the temporality of it. None of that. It's just a momentary, the fetters are like a momentary diagnostic tool to say what is appearing right now in this moment, and then work with that however it is, in whatever way seems reasonable. But beyond that, there's no real value in putting any sort of framework, marker system in it, or any of that. Does that make sense? I know that was
Yeah, it does. It does. It's just it's very dense, very heavy. I mean, understood all of it, but it just it kind of in the moment it sort of stripped away a lot of the thinking and other activities that lend a solidity to things. So I guess I could say I feel mildly speechless.
a good way for us to be.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. Um, It'd be nice to kind of take that and internalize that and live from that more.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just comes down to doing practices where you see it and recognize it more and really feel it, embracing it and internalizing it to where it just becomes this sort of integrated part of your being where it feels less and less like you are an individual entity moving through space in some very, very localized, independent way, and recognizing over and over the inherent unity of the experience of what you take to be you, and also the at the same time the 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 disparate parts that are being taken to be you that aren't. So all of the sensations feeling localized and solid, we recognize that they are not localized, that if you are just feeling sensations with closed eyes, it becomes harder and harder to tell where they're actually appearing. That we have the idea that we have one dense, solid body, and yet in our experience, we find that we are most of the time not even aware of most of the body. We can't necessarily feel parts of it. There's nothing there that really is telling us that it's that, other than perhaps a vague image in the mind of the body, which itself, as we found, does not even accurately reflect what the body actually looks like or its place in space necessarily. And that image itself is something which is constantly changing and being popped up and repopulated and then going away again. Yeah.
With that in mind, what do we do with a couple of things? One is, with doing all of this inquiry, one of the things that showed up recently, I mean, it's been the last week or so, was trying to find this thing that, you're going about, and there really are two things here, but I don't know how to talk about them succinctly, but I'll do the best I can. So number one is there's a tendency to kind of go on autopilot. And in doing so, habitual modes of operating, something shows up that seems to be a sense of someone, trying to find that. What the heck is that? And I'm sure it's probably a number of things, but the one thing that keeps coming up is those really subtle, indistinct mental pictures coupled with bodily sense and the visual field. Those seem to be the big three here. In those in the moment are taken as me.
Yeah.
So that's item number one, is this habitual creation of a sense of self or manufacturing of a sense of self in the moment. The other one is, in terms of trying to maintain or keep in touch with this perspective or the understanding of reality that you just described. All it takes is for my daughter to say one thing of the right kind, and it stirs up a lot of emotional stuff. And the next thing you know, there's that sense of someone being here because, there's this emotional disturbance that seems to have been generated by something that this person said.
Which kind of emotions are we talking about there?
Feeling I don't know how to distill it down to one. It's this. It's that feeling of, I guess maybe it's regret. It's that sense of, I did or said the wrong thing. There did or said the wrong thing again.
Okay.
There it is. She's finding fault with me again.
There's a key word in there though.
Yeah.
Again.
Yes.
Yeah. Because again, again, that the initial feeling of remorse when somebody, if really, if we're doing something that hurts other people, having that initial response of, oh, you know, that felt bad. I hurt their feelings and ooh, bad feeling there. That in itself is a very pro-social thing to have. So we do talk about the healthy shame and guilt and fear that keep us safe and keep other people around us kind of safe because we don't become just, sociopaths where we're, not considering their take experience at all. The problem is the again, where you're taking that as, oh, that's Darrell. He always has that habit of just saying the wrong thing. No, no. There was a moment of saying something. It got taken a certain way, whether you meant it to be or not.
Yeah.
And then you can have that pang of regret, and then you can apologize. But you don't have to make that into the narrative of Darrell, who is always this problem child. He's always saying the wrong thing. He's doing it again. That's where it becomes personal, and that's where it becomes a selfing issue.
I see. Okay.
So catching that when it happens and just being in that moment of, ooh, yeah, that doesn't feel good. Let me go talk to her. Let me go apologize. That's where it can end. It doesn't have to become part of your personal history.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong as long as it's just that brief of sensation alerting you to the fact that, yeah, okay, that wasn't a nice thing that you just did. Try not to do that again in the future. That's a fine, okay experience to have as long as it doesn't get made into, oh God, I'm such an ass. Every time, why can't I just behave normally around people and not hurt their feelings? And then that's going to cause more of the sensation, more of the contraction, more of the belief in you being a problem person. And then that just becomes this cycle where selfing completely takes over.
Well, and then here's the added wrinkle is in this case, it was something that was said that actually was fairly innocuous. It was completely misunderstood and turned into something that it was not actually said. And so
So
here I am nailing myself to the cross for something that actually wasn't said.
exactly. So yeah. So there's your habit of making all of these things personal is shown to you.
Yes. Okay.
And
That's helpful to hear.
good. Yeah, not personal at all.
Right.
That's something that's experienced in the moment. Doesn't mean you can't, apologize and repair the situation, even if you didn't do it intentionally, because again, you're not coming from the place of uh it's about me, it doesn't have to be you defending you, or you uh I don't know how the sentence was going to end, but sometimes that happens. But it brings to mind that there was a Zen story about the monk who got accused of impregnating the girl in the village. Did you ever hear that?
I don't think I've heard this.
Yeah, basically, he's living in this irate mother comes to the door with the daughter who's got a baby, and it says, the daughter says this was yours, you're this, you're going to take the baby. And he just goes, oh, is that so? And he takes the baby, and he, just starts raising the baby. And it's like 6 months or a year later or something, the girl comes back in tears, and she's so, apologizing. I'm so sorry. It was actually, the fish seller's son, and she didn't want to get him in trouble and admit to it, and so they lied. And so they come back all apologetic, and want the baby back. And the monk just says, well, is that so? And gives them the baby. And there's like, no attachment to the fact of his reputation being ruined because of some girl who said something about him that wasn't true, but also no attachment to the baby who he just raised for like a year, and then not knows it's not his kid, does what he does, and then hands the baby back to the rightful parents. And so it's that kind of, it's kind of an extreme example of it, but it's that kind of like, even recognizing that if it hurts somebody's feelings, even though we didn't mean it to be that way, it's still okay to take ownership of the
Hmm.
not ownership in that way, but like, you can still apologize, and you say, I'm sorry that you that it came out like that, or that you felt that way when you heard it, and
Right.
however it phrases it, where it doesn't have to be from that posture of defense, like, well, I didn't say anything wrong, that was you. You don't have to
Yeah.
do that either,
Sure.
because it has nothing to do with you. It's not about you.
So then the first example, those that sort of, I'm not sure what to call it, that form of identification, that selfing that's put together out of sensation, I guess.
Yeah. So go to the spaciousness, go to that back feeling, so where you recognize that you have sensations, you have images, you have the visual field, but there is something there which is not those things,
Hmm.
which is very clearly present. And from that place, you can just see over and over again that all you're experiencing are sensations, visual fields, mental images, and then that. None of that is personal.
Right.
None of that indicates a Darrell. And then just try to stay there as much as you can, as long as you can, in that kind of detached, spacious place where you're recognizing that words are coming out of the mouth, but you're not saying it, that
Right.
images are being appeared or appearing, but you're not seeing them or making them appear, or um, doing the identification of whatever's being seen, or the
Ah.
the knowledge of it, or the labeling of it. That is an intentional thing that you are doing.
Yeah, you're right. That's because that's the assumption, and that was something that was not seen before. There was sort of this subtle unconscious assumption that that identification is something that's being done by someone here, and that's not the case at all.
No,
Wow.
no, it's just as automatic of an experience as the visual field being seen. It
Right.
appears, but it doesn't indicate that there's somebody back here who's sitting in a little movie theater seat watching it.
Or pulling levers.
Pulling the levers, yeah, opening up the curtains of the eyes to, bring in the field, so I can see out the little windows, and then closing them up again to go to sleep. Yeah, it's none of that. It's just the same automatic processes that are happening that are completely impersonal, just like the apparent knowing or recognition of things. Like, I can recognize that this is a jar filled with tea, but am I recognizing that this is a jar filled with tea? Like,
Right.
am I consciously going through all the lists of things there could possibly be until I come up with the right one and go, "Ooh, that's it. I know what that is. That's a," and then put the label on it. No, it's this immediate intuitive process that is just happening subconsciously so fast that we can play with this and recognize it, if we really stop to see it without those labels that we put on it. It is possible to have an experience of something without that, but it's not our go-to way of being in the world because, again, we're not intentionally doing it.
Right. This is a stretch,
Yeah.
and I'll probably just have to go back and watch the video. But at the closer to the beginning of this conversation, you'd mentioned a practice of kind of walking around, going about daily business without, God, I can't even describe what you said to give you a reference point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just have to wait for you to make the video available. Go back and listen again because you described something and obviously was a very good idea for something to be doing.
Oh, geez. I don't even remember. That's the
Uh,
worst part.
yeah, well, you're not alone in that. So
I'm sorry. Uh,
fortunately, we recorded it.
Very,
That's
very
all the
fortunate.
recourse at this point.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's a really good idea to record things.
Yeah, it is.
They're out and then they're out.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll do that. That's perfectly fine. It's not the first time. And really, it's great that we're recording these things, but I really ought to be making notes too. That's really helpful. So,
I'll put the raw one up for you it's like tonight probably or tomorrow morning at the latest.
okay.
So that you can at least, rewatch that when you want or scan through and try to find the spot that you're thinking of.
Yeah, because it was somewhere in that first 30 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
It's all right. Well, neither do I. And, I'm the one that was, that it made an impression upon you. You think that would warrant some memory.
Teachable moment here.
Yeah.
The idea that I am the same Todd who said something and gave you a practice an hour and a half ago.
Right.
Clearly not.
Yeah.
Clearly, there is a difference between that Todd and this Todd. That Todd knew something, expressed something, said something, gave some sort of, you know, practice out that this Todd does not remember and has no like conscious recollection of. That is how our life is all the time. We are constantly forgetting stuff, constantly experiencing things from a new perspective, and yet we have this idea that it's a consistency, a coherency between all those moments of the life of Darrell and Todd that have always been this way. There's something in here that has just always been the same since I was a kid, and it's simply not the case.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, or ironic thing is, if that was really true, and I'll leave out all the intermediate steps because I think everyone will understand. If that was true, that you were the same person, both of us were the same person we were an hour and a half ago, then obviously we would live forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not happening.
Nope. Nope. And also, it would make the hour and a half talk that we've had completely irrelevant. It would be pointless if you could not change because you only
Yeah.
change by the taking in of new information.
Yeah. Excellent point. Wow.
So the fact that we have schools and talks and discussions and dialogues is testament to the fact that we are constantly changing and able to change, and that hopefully when you enter school, you come out a completely different person in some way.
Yeah,
Otherwise, what's the point?
yeah, exactly. Wow. Okay.
Thank
Wow.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Boy, it's funny that it would make a person feel tired, but for some reason it did.
Been through a lot this session, really. Covered a
Yeah,
lot.
some heaviness.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Be gentle, let things settle, and see what comes up.
Okay. Yeah, and kind of I think need to go back through the recording of this, make some notes. All right.
All
Well,
right.
yeah. Okay. Well, thanks as always.
Thank you. Have a lovely night,
All right.
and keep me posted on things.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soonish.
Look forward.
All right. Bye.
Bye.